G'day YouTube. TBC I think is Tanaka brush cutter. 500 is perhaps 50 cubic centimetres of swept cylinder volume. Driving a solid aluminium bobbin. In a system which is simple, almost primitive, but effectively robust. Sufficiently robust as not to be destroyed while brush cutting on the rocks, which is my only option. Here a stone, there a stone. No shortage of stones. The way it works is to know how long a string has to be, set off with pre-cut strings, and just accept the fact that you lose quite a lot of each pre-cut string by the time you consider the part at the center of the disc which never gets used. It means that you're really only cutting brush with 1/3 of the string. And in fact, most of the time, not only will you wear the string down, you'll break a string off, easily and regularly accumulating a whole bunch of busted strings. Changing the strings is done in the field with pliers, thus using leverage to extract the used string. Once again, waste 2/3 of it. Here's another pro tip. Do you notice that this appears to have been bent into a U-shape profile? That's because I did. First, find the center of the string. Grasp the center really hard. Bend it from both sides around the pliers. Then take that edge and cold crimp it from both sides, as shown. Now you've got a string that's going to find it very difficult to escape. Once fed onto the bobbin, just a little bit of preparation, and then the strings are fed out. And that's the system I've been using for about 130 of 150 hours, which I have put on this machine. This aluminium spool's getting to just start to show some wear. Not actually a lot of wear compared to something like this or that. But I thought the other day might be a good idea to invest in another one, have it on hand, ready for when this one dies. It wasn't until I got home that I actually inspected the replacement. It's not so much of a replacement as it is an upgrade. Look at that. As you can see, this has 2 holes and this has 4 holes there and 4 more holes there. Here we have 2 outlets emitting the 2 ends of one string 180 degrees out of phase. Here we have 4 outlets for the 4 ends of 2 strings, apparentarily. So I think the obvious thing to do is to fuel up now that I've just put a new string on the old bobbin, and rather than recut this stuff that I've already cut, inside what I think of as the defendable area, i.e. as far as I can reach with my fire hoses. I think we'll come out here to the edge and we'll test the two different systems out in the uncut. Which, as you can see, is pretty rough. And yeah, maybe not so much here as out over there. And we'll see how we go. First with 2-string, and then I'll come back and change heads, so to speak. That's assuming that I can get the new head on without any major difficulty. And that may be a big assumption. But we do have actual head-high grass on which to do the test. So that should be a good test, eh? And of course, part of the fun of this is that you're not allowed to cut down any food plants, like that flax lily, which is just on the point of flowering, and if left undisturbed, it should produce a spray of little blue berries, one for each flower. As well as all the other wild native food plants you've got to keep your eye out for. One of the problems, getting long, strong fibres wound up in the head. They don't call it flax lily for nothing. Long, strong fibres. Yep, you are seeing what you're seeing. One has to carry a pocket knife in order to cut free the brush cutter. Right, no drama. We'll go again. Okay, there you go. That's how it works with 2 strings. And yeah, we've worn a bit down on the end of that end. Other end isn't so bad. One of the questions in my mind is going to be whether having 4 strings means that you don't get as far into the string before you hit an obstacle, and therefore you might be less likely to actually break any one string off when you start encountering sticks and rocks and stuff. And perhaps having 4 strings, it might make it a little bit more difficult for flax lilies like this one to get in there and stick up the works. Anyway, this gets to pause while I go and ideally change heads, but not the one on my shoulders. This, of course, is the other sort of thing that you're not permitted to brush cut. Trachymean incisor, wild native parsnips. The forest only looks as if it'd starve a rat to death if you don't know what you're looking at. Hawkeye. It fits, Kimosabi. It fits. And because I use the heaviest string available, as usual, I have bored out all the holes to facilitate fitting on an easier basis. There we go. Okay, well, I've got 1 string on. And as near as damn is to swearing, these strings are about the same length. So initially I'm not going to try and cut the strings any shorter. I guess we're going to see whether 4 strings is better than 2 strings, eh? One thing I have noticed is the new spool is deeper. Than the old spool. Might have to amend my technique lest I stick the thing too deep into the rocks. That's where we were. I think we'll have a go over there. First impression is it shakes like a shower of shit, and it's very slow and sluggish to respond to the throttle. Still got all 4 strings. They don't seem to have worn much. 4 strings. Still got 4 strings. They are worn down a bit, but they have worn down evenly at the tip. Those strings are about halfway worn down, and they will continue to cut effectively, probably halfway back in there. So, objectively, it works better. The 4 strings, well, I cut down a couple of flax lilies and I didn't get sucked in or tied up once. I quite literally cut about twice as much in about 1.5 times the amount of time. Must admit, I was enjoying it, so I kept on doing it. But yeah, I wasn't sparing the strings, but because you've got 4 of them outlining the disc, you don't tend to go as far onto sticks as when there was only 2 strings outlining the discs. And they're abrading away from the very tip and maintaining the square thick section. Whereas when you're using the old bobbin with 1 string and 2 ends, you use a longer bit of string. I'm pretty sure more of the string gets wasted in the center, and it's quite common because so much of the string contacts each obstacle, whether it's a rock or a stick or the ground. What you wind up with is a long, gentle, beveled tip. So it might take 5 centimeters from the square section full thickness string out to a thin, almost razor's edge, papery little tip. And you have to burn a lot of fuel swinging those little thin tips in order to get them going fast enough to be stiff enough to cut anything. Whereas this thing is clearly going to burn more fuel because I spent just about the whole time on full throttle. You put the energy into the rotating mass, you let it spin, and you don't have to correct with the throttle for the varying torque loads applied by obstacles. You just keep pouring the power on and you chop straight through. Yeah, it picked up a little bit of grass, but it didn't let enough of it get far enough in for the grass to have actually jammed and caused me to have to stop and dig it out with a knife. So that's a bonus. Now I did, because it was shaking so much, attempt to balance this thing by trimming all the strings to the length of the guard. So we've lost 1/3 of the operating radius, perhaps a half, because by the time it gets down to a little short thing like that, yeah, well, it'll be easier to swing. It won't have as much air resistance, and it'll probably burn about the same amount of fuel as swinging a full-sized string as hard as you can. Quite strange, but I'm not unhappy with the result. That gives you an example of the beveled edge, which you get by basically working the end of each string twice as hard when you've got the same amount of power distributed across 2 strings compared to distributed across 4 strings. And when you're only going across 2 strings, you exceed the probably compression and tension and cut resistance stress limits of the string. Here's another couple of fairly prime examples of the feathered edge string. And yes, you've got some length to it, but there's no weight in the tips. So like I said, you have to burn a lot of fuel to spin it fast enough for it to be stiff enough for it to cut anything. So perhaps this might cut more area of grass the same height, the same thickness, with the same amount of debris on the ground, more grass in less time with the same amount of fuel and probably the same amount of wastage and wear and tear on the strings. Maybe less, because even though you've got more strings, you're not wasting as much of each string, because you are maintaining the mass on the end of all the strings. 2 strings good, 4 strings better. 2 strings good, 4 strings better. It sounds like something that the animals would chant on Animal Farm. Thank you, George Orwell. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.